Have the people of Westeros been sold a lie about the death of the Weirwoods south of the Neck? Let's take a look. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. If you like theories, background, history and lore about The Lord of the Rings, A Song of Ice and Fire and The Witcher, then this is the channel for you. Welcome. This is another collaboration with the excellent History of Westeros. Do please check out their YouTube channel and podcast. There's a link in the description. When the first men came to Westeros thousands of years ago, they were frightened by the faces they found carved onto the bone-white weirwood trees, trees with red leaves that looked eerily like bloody hands. The children of the forest had been carving these heart trees for eons and viewed them as sacred, but fear drove the first men to cut them down in great numbers. War between the species followed, until at last the pact was formed, and the first men not only ceased to destroy the heart trees, but began to join the children in worshipping them. But when the Andal invasions began, thousands of years later we're told, the cycle of fear and destruction of the heart trees began anew. Famously, the North resisted the Andal invasions, and even now weirwood heart trees are relatively plentiful above the Neck. It is very different in the south, where the Andals eventually conquered almost everywhere. The Andal invasion may have taken place over centuries, but they were definitely a united civilization with a distinct culture, and most importantly, a religion quite hostile to the old gods. They even migrated from a region in Andalos called the Axe, which had long ago become an important symbol in Andal culture. Axes were therefore commonplace amongst Andals. Thus, even Andal peasants came equipped to destroy heart trees. This time, though, there was no second pact, no reprieve for the ancient white trees. The destruction was thorough, yet not every single weirwood tree was cut down, and there is much evidence that power lingers even in the stumps that remain. So, which heart trees survived those waves of destruction? Let's take a look. As a starting point, Catelyn Stark at one point thinks this. In the south, the last weirwoods had been cut down or burned out 1,000 years ago, except on the Isle of Faces, where the Green Men kept their silent watch. This turns out to be quite a large generalisation, rather than an exact description of the situation. As we'll see, there are actually a surprisingly large number of weirwoods if you know where to look. But she is certainly right about the Isle of Faces. That remains the largest untouched home for weirwoods perhaps in the whole of Westeros. We won't know for sure unless and until we actually go to the island in one of the books, but even from afar it is possible to see the weirwoods that are there. Actually, that part of the Riverlands has quite a concentration of weirwoods, alive and dead. There's the one in Harrenhal, of course, that plays a role in the Dance of the Dragons. In fact, there used to be many more there before Harren the Black cut them down for building materials. There's one in the Godswood in Riverrun, plus a colossal but dead one at Raventree Hall, the home of House Blackwood. The ravens still roost there every night, though, so perhaps there's still some life in it. The Brotherhood Without Banners hide out somewhere in the Riverlands in a cave system with weirwood roots that form a throne of sorts for Beric. We don't know if the weirwood above is still there or not, but there clearly was once one or more. Similarly, there was once a grove of 31 weirwoods atop the hill at High Heart, another that Dunk and Egg briefly stop at en route to White Walls, and a short journey outside Harrenhal, Jaime uses a stump of weirwood to rest his head on. What is interesting about these sites is that though the weirwoods have gone, magic seems to linger there. Jaime has a prophetic dream while resting his head on that weirwood stump, and the ghost of High Heart is very clear that at High Heart, this place belongs to the old gods still. They linger here, as I do, shrunken and feeble, but not yet dead. If you're wondering, it is also among the weirwood stumps that Dunk and Egg first meet Maynard Plum, who is, well, fans of those stories have a strong idea that he is someone with a strong link to weirwood trees. We'll come back to the point that magic lingers even when the trees have been chopped down in a moment, because it's an important one. We might think, and Melisandre definitely thinks, that chopping down or burning the weirwoods destroys their power, but it doesn't seem quite as straightforward as that. A lesson there perhaps for Melisandre, who is the keenest in the main story to be destroying weirwoods. Anyway, those are the trees we know of in the Riverlands, but there may well be even more. We discover via Queen Alison in Fire and Blood that there may be as many as 12 houses south of the Neck that hold on to the old gods, and presumably therefore at least have access to a local Weirwood Tree, if not actually have one in their own godswood. At which point we should clear up a language issue. Regardless of the number of weirwoods, there are still many godswoods in the south, usually found in castles or villages. The original idea seems to have been much like we see in Winterfell, a weirwood tree at the heart of things in the middle of a small wood, providing easy access for the residents of a castle or town. They don't need to travel out of town to worship or have weddings witnessed, for example. When all those weirwoods were cut down, the idea of having that godswood persisted, though. Who doesn't like an area of parkland to visit and just contemplate life? In many cases, the original Weirwood tree seems to have been replaced by another impressive tree to act as a focal point, an oak tree perhaps. This is still called the Heart Tree, even though it is not an actual weirwood. This seems to be the case in the Red Keep, for example. There is a godswood and a heart tree there. Sansa visits it regularly while she is there, but the heart tree is an oak, not a weirwood. Of course, King's Landing and the Red Keep are from much later than the Andal invasion. And as an aside, in House of the Dragon, the Red Keep does have a weirwood heart tree, though in Game of Thrones it does not. This of course implies that it will be cut down or maybe even burned down at some point in show canon, perhaps during events on screen. But let's return to where else there are weirwoods south of the Neck. As we're in the Crown Lands, we should note the slender young weirwood in the Whispers that Brienne encounters while on a bit of a wild goose chase looking for Sansa Stark. That's interesting because it's quite an abandoned spot. Was it planted there, or did it just sprout up of its own accord? And did Brienne inadvertently make a sacrifice to it by killing those 3 former brave companions under its branches? Food for thought. Moving down to the Stormlands, there was one in Storm's End, but Melisandre burned it, and there are also occasional weirwoods deep in the Rainwood. Arianne sees them as she travels through. We don't hear of many being in the Reach, but there are 3 ancient ones at Highgarden, known as the 3 Singers. They have grown entangled so as to appear just one, but remain graceful, we're told. There is also one on the Isle of Ravens in the Citadel. It's half dead, though the ravens still like to perch in its branches. There's a theme emerging here, actually, as we noted earlier. The weirwoods we're told are dead, the Citadel, Raventree Hall, still attract ravens, and the stumps left after trees have been cut down, at High Heart and where Jaime slept, still seem to retain some magic. It's as if killing a weirwood tree doesn't actually kill it. Something lingers. Moving a little north, we get the weirwood tree in Casterly Rock. It doesn't seem happy with its environment, but it definitely still seems to be alive and dominating that cavern with its roots. And that's pretty much it. There are perhaps a few more dotted around south of the Neck that we don't read of, but we know of none in Dawn. Indeed, the Children of the Forest refer to it as the Empty Land, apparently, and also none on the Iron Islands, although I have my suspicions that Naga's ribs on Old Wick may not be the ribs of a sea dragon, but a petrified grove of weirwoods. A concerted effort was made to plant a weirwood in the Eyrie, but without success. Perhaps it couldn't survive because its roots couldn't go deep enough down to connect up with the rest of the weirwood network. That's one of the most popular theories in the fandom, that all of the weirwood trees are actually connected underground, which would explain why weirwood trees aren't in some regions. Their roots can't get through the rocky mountainous ground like the Eyrie, Dawn and the Iron Islands to join the main network. So what does all this mean? I think it's that George R. R. Martin is showing us that the popular understanding about weirwoods in Westeros is wrong. To return to that quote from Cat early on, in the south the last weirwoods had been cut down or burned out 1,000 years ago. She may think that, and it's a view barely challenged throughout the story, but it's wrong, even as a generalisation. There's even a weirwood in the castle she grew up in, and another at Harrenhal a few miles away, and lots on the Isle of Faces, still more in the Rainwood, 3 at Highgarden, another at Casterly Rock, and so on. And there are even hints that in some remote and abandoned places like the Whispers, young and slender weirwoods are even starting to grow afresh. And perhaps even more importantly than that, the fact that a weirwood has been chopped down or has died, and many were destroyed, doesn't seem to stop what remains being magical in some way. It's just that you can no longer see them from above ground. The accepted understanding of weirwood trees among humans was that the children of the forest, or greenseers, could see through their eyes and spy on their enemies. That's part of why the first men chopped down so many weirwoods. But in A Dance with Dragons, Bloodraven teaches Bran that even this is wrong. "Nor will your sight be limited to your godswood," he says. "The singers carved eyes into their heart trees to awaken them, and those are the first eyes a new greenseer learns to use. But in time, you will see well beyond the trees themselves." So, a talented greenseer is not limited to the trees, which is a huge revelation. It means that the tree felling of the first men and Andal invasions and Melisandre's tree burning haven't actually worked. They haven't eliminated greenseers' abilities to see through the trees, or for the trees to communicate through green dreams. Weirwoods may have disappeared from the landscape, but their magic is still there. Rather wonderfully, George R. R. Martin took the reader on this voyage of discovering the truth about the trees as well as Bran. We were told early on that the trees were gone in the south, that the power of the greenseers was destroyed, and so on, but now we know different. Which means that we should probably take a second look at how weirwoods in the south may have been involved in the story in ways we hadn't considered. What's the significance of Brienne's sacrifice before the Weirwood Tree at the Whispers? Of Beric Dondarrion sitting in that throne of weirwood roots? Of Duncan Egg meeting Maynard Plum in that grove of chopped-down weirwoods? And of whatever's going on at Harrenhal? All these things are, at the very least, witnessed by the Weirwood network, and perhaps they may have even influenced events, like when Jaime rested his head on that weirwood stump, had that dream, and then went back to save Brienne's life. Despite all appearances, the Weirwood network is alive, well, and influencing events south of the Neck. If you'd like to see more videos like this, diving deep into George R. R. Martin's world of ice and fire, there's a link to my playlist on the left of your screen. Or if you'd like to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. I'll see you again soon.